Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. You know what's going to happen as a result of the IQ requirement for a middle-class job rising? More poverty will mean more violence. More unemployment will mean more welfare. Either the government does not do welfare and we get tons of violence as a result, or the government does more welfare to deal with the unemployment, but then that begs the question, how is the government going to pay for it? Is the government going to raise taxes on rich people? Would even a huge amount of taxation be enough to pay to support the bottom 85% of people? Would the rich tolerate that much taxation? And how are the rich going to remain rich when hardly anyone is buying their products because of hardly anyone that is buy the products of the corporations owned by the rich people? How, they own huge shares of those companies, right? Like, how are we going to keep their share price high and thereby preserve their wealth if we're not buying their products because we have no money, because we have no jobs, because the IQ requirement for a middle class job haven't gotten up to you need a 120, maybe even a 130 IQ to get a job at all. And all the other jobs, the 119 IQs and lower, or the 124 IQs and lower, or whatever, those jobs are all taken by automation now. No more jobs like that, right? Like, how are they going to stay rich, the rich people, when hardly anyone has any money because of hardly anyone having a job? It's going to get ugly. It's going to get really, really ugly. And another thing that will happen is the rich people will get really ruthless to make money, cheating in every way imaginable to make money, especially as the IQ requirement for a middle-class job gets higher and higher. Soon it'll be people with, 135, 150, 160 IQs making a living. And yet all the rich people will only be making a living through cheating. And then the smart people will get angry at the rich people just making money by being cheating douchebags, and just because they inherited a bunch of gold from their parents or whatever. And then the rich people will be competing all the more ruthlessly because they're afraid of the smart people taking over. People like Zeitgeist Eater. And so it's going to be absolutely ruthless competition between the rich people who have the power of money and influence and the people who are really smart and have that power, and they want to build a more functional, fair world. Maybe not out of compassion, but just because they want a less predatory, a world that's less unfair to them. And they want to take power, and they're like, hey, we deserve it. We have the high IQs. Why should we keep letting these assholes with dynastic wealth or political power keep, running the world when they're screwing everything up, We can do a lot better job running the world than them, the smart people will say, right? And then you'll have the poor people providing this massive pressure cooker because a lot of them can't get jobs. And even if they can, they're pissed off because they're getting paid jack shit. And either they're getting welfare to survive, in which case rich people are pissed off about having to pay for it, or the normies are not getting welfare, in which case they're starving and are trying to overthrow the government over the fact that they're starving. Or they're, gardening on a big piece of land that they have, but they're refusing to pay taxes because they can't get a job. All they can do is, grow food to survive, right? But the government wants its pound of flesh. It wants its blood, it's blood money, but you can't get blood from a stone. These people are not making any money. They're just gardening. So then what's the government going to do? Try and confiscate their land? You think that's going to go well? No, that's going to get really violent. It's going to get really, really ugly when so many people are unemployed. I mean, what's the solution? There really is no solution, except for eugenic breeding. But even that might be, I don't want to say too late, because in a sense it's really never too late, but it's almost basically too late. Because we should have been doing eugenic breeding program for the last few decades, if not the last several decades. Because we're like the kid who waited and never did his big paper. He waited until the night before instead of working on it every day for the last few weeks. That's what our society has essentially done. There are no shortcuts. You cannot magically whip out a brilliant paper in almost no time. You can't turn this situation around in society because we've not been preparing for this situation at all. We've not been raising IQs. We've not been getting people to be moral without religion. We have not been building decentralized infrastructures. We have not been getting off of oil, getting off of nuclear energy, getting onto solar, getting onto wind, getting onto geothermal. We have not been doing any of the things that we should have been doing if humanity is to survive, or at least thrive. So humanity is either going to go extinct or we're going to go through a really, really painful adjustment process. And this adjustment period is probably going to last a long time. Maybe, 40 to 80 years, maybe longer, who knows. But probably at least 20 to 40 years. Maybe billions of people will die in the process. It'll be utter insanity. All because for decades and decades we have not been preparing for this huge crunch that we are very near toward hitting. This is probably going to be the biggest die-off and the biggest conflict in all of human history. It's probably going to be the biggest event since the dinosaurs going extinct. It's going to be insane, absolutely insane. So yeah, rich people are going to be fighting with smart people, and they'll be doing so utterly ruthlessly. The smart people will be using their IQs to fight, by coding and stuff, and the rich people will be using their wealth to fight. And the poor, the bottom 85% of the population, will be the ones who will be suffering tremendously. They'll be suffering far more than the rich or the smart people will be. And the best thing that could happen is that all the smart people join together and be benevolent and build a sane world, like Zeitgeist Eater is doing. But if most of the smart people don't do that, if they keep working for the multinational corporations, then they're just compounding the insanity. They're just working for the side of evil. Incompetent evil. Not even functional competent evil, but incompetent evil. Stupid, short-sighted, destructive, idiotic evil. And it's going to be bad. Because maybe the coders could save us, sort of. It would still be painful for an extremely long time, but the coders could perhaps save humanity if they're all doing the Zeitgeist Eater thing. Or even 20% of them doing it. But no, most of them are working for Facebook and Google and other evil corporations like that, and the consequences are going to be horrific. Everything the elites do is cheating. Not just sexually, but I mean like in business and other things. They just cheat and cheat and cheat and cheat. It's all Gordon Geckos at the top. That's all there is at the top. They're all scumbags. They're all using inside information. They're all in bed with government. They're all turning a blind eye to the corruption. They're all cheating their customers. They're all doing scumbag things in a huge, huge way. Not even in a smaller and accidental way. I'm talking about on purpose. This is the way the people at the top operate. They're all Gordon Geckos, basically. Now, it didn't used to be that way. Maybe there were a lot of Gordon Geckos at the top 60 to 80 years ago, but not nearly as many as there are today. Not even close. So I think that as they get even more ruthless, and it's just all the same as today, but far, far worse, well, then it'll get to be a situation where everyone gets really, really pissed off at the elites because it becomes obvious to everybody that these people have no talent, they have no skill, they have no foresight, they have no common sense, their products are low quality, on purpose, they're not real businessmen or entrepreneurs, they're basically just con men, they're all Gordon Geckos. So when that becomes super, super obvious to everybody, as these guys at the top get worse and worse due to the competition with the high IQ guys over the next 20 to 40 years, it's going to be a situation where the bottom 80% of people see what dishonest, nepotistic scumbags these people at the top are, and they're going to get super, super pissed off about it. Some people have this attitude of eat the rich. Oh my God, that is going to be the very tip of the iceberg of that sentiment in 20 to 40 years. People are going to be saying anybody who has ever been promiscuous, burn that guy at the stake. Any woman who has ever been promiscuous, burn her at the stake. Anybody who has ever worked at Wall Street and has not since been actively fighting evil, like Max Kaiser or somebody. He's an advocate for gold. He fights evil, so they'd let him have a pass. But anybody else who's still working on Wall Street, they'll be saying, burn those people at the stake. They'll be saying anybody with more than 10,000 in the bank should be burned at the stake. That's what the bottom 85% of people will be saying in a horrific crash or a situation where 85% of people are unemployed due to the IQ requirement having risen for a middle class job having risen so high and automation having taken all the rest of the jobs. Right? Like they're going to be saying, let's find all those people and burn them at the stake. The bottom 85% will. They'll be saying, hey, let's find them, burn them at the stake, film it, put it online, and hunt down anybody who disagrees. Let's put it online on some website, and then everybody checks the website, and then you grab the IP addresses of everybody who watches the video, and anybody who downloads the video of burning these people to stake, let's go, trace their IP addresses, and then let's go exsanguinate them too, and make more videos of burning more people to stake. I mean, it's going to get so ugly, you can't even imagine it. It's going to be super, super, super ugly, considering how many people we're going to exsanguinate. I mean, millions, if not hundreds of millions of people will die because that's what happens when you promote miscegenation at the very same time when you should instead be promoting eugenic breeding. Because soon you'll need a 115 IQ or higher and a great memory to just be able to get any job in the near future. But they're promoting miscegenation, which lowers IQs down to 92, when they should be encouraging people to have higher IQ kids. So when 85% of the population is unemployable and automation has taken all the jobs, it's going to get really, really, really ugly and violent and nasty. It's just going to be unimaginably horrific. And what's the government going to be able to do to stop it? Nothing. Because 85% of the population super pissed off. How could they stop that many people? I mean, what are they going to do? Nuke every city? No, they won't be able to stop it. It'll be absolute insanity. But the world itself, but definitely America, is the mouse utopia experiment. We're descending into absolute hell. And it seems like the only people who are going to thrive are the high IQ people and who also have good memories. And either they're going to get really benevolent and really red-pilled and they're going to start trying to save the world by coding a sane world into existence like Satoshi did and like Zeitgeist Eater's trying to do and like the people who work on Tails and Tor are doing. Or people at the bottom 85% will start going after those intelligent people too and exsanguinating them too if they're not, doing the Zeitgeist Eater Satoshi thing, or people are going to get really, really, really tribalistic, and people will only care about their own blood, or maybe their own race. But, considering how many, people there are in this country, and how low the value of human life gets when, the population increases, I don't know that people are going to, unite with people on the basis of race, especially when most people are scumbags, including most people of your own race. You know what I mean? Like, if you're a good black person, you probably look around and you're like, oh my God, most people in my own race are terrible. If you're a white guy, you probably look around at most white people, if you're red-pilled and moral, you probably look around at most white people and you're like, oh my God, these people are disgusting. These are not my brothers. These are not my friends. These people are not my allies. You know what I mean? Like, people are only going to start caring about their own blood. Like their brothers, their sisters, their cousins, their nephews, their nieces, etc. And then they're going to be like, fuck everybody else. They don't care about anybody else. Property tax will also have to go the way of the dodo bird, because otherwise people will not be able to survive by gardening. So government will have to abolish property tax in order to make it so that people who can't work do not rebel also because of being prevented from growing their own food. Of course, city dwellers will not be able to grow their own food, so there might be massive die-off of people who live in the city. But the people who own land and guns and know how to garden will be able to survive by growing food on their land, and they'll keep everybody else off their land with the guns they own. Even if they're young, guys who have high IQs and can thus have jobs will be in charge of everybody in their family. Their cousins, their brothers, their nephews, etc. Even if those guys are young, like, 20 years old or even way younger than that. They'll be in charge because everybody will be financially dependent on that guy. He might be the only one in the whole family with a job, so he'll have to support the entire family. Even the cousins and people like that, you know what I mean? Like, because he's the only one in the family who has a high IQ and a great memory, right? So such guys might be the start of a new eugenics, the start of breeding programs, because they're going to know firsthand that, low IQ and bad memory equals starving to death, or being in danger of starving to death, or at the very least being a parasite who's having to be fed by, another family member who is smart enough to have a job, right? So then those guys are going to see that. They're not going to like having to support their entire immediate and extended family. And so they're going to demand that a breeding program be started by the whole family. Right? If there's one guy in the family who has a 130 IQ and everybody else has IQs between 95 and 107 and thus cannot work, well then he will want more people to work so as to lift the weight from his shoulders that he feels from having to financially support lots of people. So he'll demand that his sisters and his female cousins and his nieces and his cousins' daughters all get pregnant with sperm bank sperm, or at least from the sperm from some guy that he knows that has a really high IQ and a really good memory and a really good health. He'll say, hey, we'll pay you for some sperm, and then the guy gives him the sperm, he gives it to the girl, she gets herself pregnant with it with a turkey baster, and then, she has, a high IQ kid with a great memory, so that the next generation will have way more high IQ kids with great memories who will then be able to, work, and then, it won't all be on that guy's shoulders anymore, So, there will be fewer people in the next generation who are unable to support themselves, and there will be more people in the next generation who will be high enough in IQ to get jobs and thus support themselves and the rest of their relatives who still don't have high enough IQs, right? And after a couple generations of doing eugenic breeding like that, everybody will have a high enough IQ. And this is without genetic engineering. But of course, this will have to be done just to survive, because who knows whether genetic engineering will even be created when society's collapsing all around us in every way possible. You know what I mean? Even China probably, right? But if this doesn't happen, or before it happens, then what will happen? Then what will happen is that there are more and more people who cannot work because their IQ is being too low. This will mean that there will be fewer people buying products because they have no money, because they have no job, and thus those companies will make less profits and they'll have to lay people off. And that will lead to even more unemployment, which will lead to even fewer people who have enough money to buy things. And that will lead to even more layoffs and more businesses going out of business and more people not buying other products because of having been laid off because of that. And then those businesses lay off people because they're not getting enough of their products sold. And then those people don't buy products either. You see, it's a vicious circle, right? That's how depressions happen, right? But the difference between this happening in the future versus it having happened in the past is that in the past, there was no high IQ requirement to have a job. And so everybody could work, It's just that, a depression came along, and so everybody temporarily could not work. Either the government was spending too much, or it fucked around with the currency, like put us on a gold standard, but like at the same time did not revalue gold higher. So then you have deflation, massive deflation, which causes a depression. They always say, oh, gold standards didn't work. They caused depressions, and that's why we went off them. No, that is bullshit. The reason the gold standard didn't work, the reason we went off it, is because the government retardedly did not revalue gold at a much higher price like it should have, like it had to have, to avoid deflation. So it kept gold at the low price. Deflation resulted, and then you had a depression as a result of it. It's not the fault of the gold standard. It's the fault of the retarded government setting the price of gold and setting it way too low. Not revaluing it, having printed all this money and then not revaluing gold and at a much higher price. That's why the gold standard, quote unquote, caused depressions. It's not an argument against a gold standard. But anyway, like I was saying, like this is what happens. Like depressions, like people are laid off, fewer people buying products, more people are laid off as a result of that. And then more people don't buy products and more people are laid off, etc. Like this is how depressions can happen. Like they feed on themselves, you know what I mean? But like people still could work back then. It's just there was an economic event happening that's only going to last a certain amount of time, especially if we have freedom or government stops spending so much. Well, then, we're going to bounce right back. You know what I mean? Because everybody could still work. But today, or in the very near future, today, a lot of people can't work. And 20, 30, 40 years from now, way, way fewer people will be able to work. Probably the majority of people will not be able to work because they'll have IQs and or memories too bad to be able to learn enough or understand enough, right? And so it was totally different when you had depressions back then. This is going to be a totally new thing because people will be unable to work, not just unwilling or unable to find a job, but unable intellectually to do the work necessary to have a job. This will be utterly unprecedented in all of human history. You see, so, the coming depression due to massive unemployment caused by automation and the high IQ requirement to have any job at all, this coming depression will not be recovered from until IQs rise. In other words, this depression will go on for 15 years at least, and that's if people start doing eugenics immediately. If they don't start doing eugenics immediately, it could last 20, 25, 30 years. Until we all start doing eugenics, this depression will never end. Or until the government or the high IQ people use technology to just murder us all. I mean, like, unless they do that to us, unless they, do that, then this depression will never end, Depressions, are bad, but, genocide is far worse. Genocide is a horrible thing. You know what I mean? So let's not get genocided by the elites just because we have not done eugenics. You know what I mean? Like, the people who have, high IQs and good memories and families will become the new patriarchs of those families. Whether they're high in IQ from genetic engineering or more likely, they're just lucky enough to have high IQ because we've not started doing genetic engineering yet. But they'll force all the women of the family to get pregnant with sperm bank sperm or from some other high IQ, great memory, great health guy's sperm, so as to give birth to a smarter next generation of people. Either genetic engineering or eugenic breeding. That is the only thing that will end the coming depression once it starts. Because if people are unemployable, then there can be no recovery. And I'm not saying this depression caused by the coronavirus. I'm saying the coming depression is going to come about because of mass unemployment, because of the high IQ requirement for a middle-class job at that time being too high for most people to work. Only I think it's 15%, maybe it's 9%. It's either 9 or 15% of the population have an IQ above 115. I think it's 9%. Hardly anybody has an IQ 115 or above. You know what I mean? The percentage is quite small. Like I said, it's like 9 or 15% or something. I think it's 9%. And so this means that most people will be unemployed when their IQ requirement for a middle class job is 116 or higher. So it's going to be really ugly. That depression, once it starts, it will not end until we have massive eugenics, having raised the most people's IQs above 115 or so, or maybe even above 120, right? At least there will be no recovery without going back to gardening to survive, and people probably will be gardening in the meantime to survive. And while gardening, going back to that, is survival, is like a society of a sort, it's not a high-tech society. And so to continue society the way it's existed for the last several decades, it'll be necessary to raise IQs so that everyone or almost everyone is once again employable, because the average IQ having gone up to 120 or something like that. Due to either genetic engineering or due to families doing eugenic breeding with high IQ, great memory, great health men's sperm. men with great health, high IQs, and great memories, using that sperm to, do a lot of eugenic breeding, or the smartest person in the family might, give all his sperm to all the girls of another family, and then that family's highest IQ, greatest memory, greatest health guy might give all his sperm to the first guy's family. You know what I mean? So that there's no inbreeding or anything, but yet they both make sure that all their families have enough high IQ, great memory sperm to make it so that they can do eugenics. You know what I mean? These smart people who are the patriarchs of the family, they could be even very young, like 13 years old, because you just have to have a high IQ to be a good investor or a good coder. It's a matter of IQ and memory. It's not even really a matter of age. So there might be very young patriarchs of families in the near future, within the next 40 years. The patriarchs might be, 13, 14, 15, or 18, but, like I said, maybe as young as 13. And maybe the wiser, older, but lower in IQ members of the family who are older might act as the young, high IQ kids as advisors, but the kid gets to make the final decisions. But the older family members have the maturity to give him good advice about some things. Like, people don't care about people like they used to, and so a 13-year-old who can make money online and is the only one in the family who can make money because he's the only one with an IQ high enough to make money and a good enough memory, he can code, or he can play money he can, make money by playing the Forex or ETFs or stocks or whatever else. Such a kid is not going to take care of his family unless they give him authority over everyone else in the family. Or unless they give that 13-year-old kid authority over his whole family, he's not going to take care of them, especially since people don't care about anybody but themselves these days, right? So, yes, I can totally imagine a world where people of all ages, even as young as 13 or 14, are in charge of their entire families, both their immediate families, their brothers and sisters and parents, and their brothers and sisters as kids, but also they're in charge of their cousins and their aunts and uncles and their cousins as kids and all the rest of it. Like anyone with any job, even a crappy job, will be very powerful in the future. At least powerful compared to their family members who don't have jobs. Because, 80 to 90% of people, or maybe more, being unemployed because they're not having IQs and memories high enough, right? You have to prepare for this stuff ahead of time. Just like a CEO has to prepare ahead of time because of changes in technology, law, the economy, etc. Like, if you're a CEO and you don't prepare for that stuff, you're not keeping up on that. Right? Like, if you're not keeping up on what's going on in your sector, and also in terms of, law and technology and interest rates and all that, like, if you're not keeping up with all of that, then your company probably will go bankrupt and die. That's why the job of CEO is such a high-paid job, because you have to keep up with everything, and you have to not only see what's coming down the pike in the future, but you also have to keep up with those changes and do so in a financially competitive way. For example, you can't just create tablets before anybody else does, computer tablets like the iPad. Your company's tablet also has to be affordable, functional, desirable to the consumer because of working well and because of being beautifully designed, being pleasing, aesthetically pleasing in terms of user interface and the outside shell, and the interface has to be intuitive, not just attractive. You know what I mean? Like, you could be the first to market with a tablet, but if it's too expensive, or it's ugly, or it's hard to use, or it's buggy, then you're not going to sell many and your business will fail, even though you had a good idea and you were first to market with it. You know what I mean? Like, you have to not just innovate and keep up with changes. You have to do so in a competitive way against other companies who are trying to beat you to the punch and do it better than you. You have to not just, be first to market or whatever. You got to do so in a competitive way. And you have to do it all affordably as well. It's not easy being a CEO. Patriarchs of a family will be like the CEO of their family, and it'll be a difficult job, a very difficult job, because they'll not only have to work to make money and support all their immediate and extended family, but they'll also have to see the difficulties coming down the road so that they can then prepare for them. And they'll have to have the power, authority, or people skills to convince his family to tell, that what he tells them to do, right? Like, such as when he tells his sisters and female cousins to get pregnant with sperm from high IQ guys with great memories who also have great health, right? He has to be able to convince them to do that. He has to convince them that it'll be horrific if they don't, and that this is the only way to survive, right? But this stuff is coming down the pike. A society cannot sustain itself by having most of its population out of work and just giving those people free money, right? Like, it has to be remembered, the government can print currency, but it cannot print purchasing power. The government cannot create purchasing power at all. What's his name? Head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, he said it himself. The government can, insure or create dollars or whatever, but he said, but we can't ensure the purchasing power of those dollars. That's basically exactly what he said. Like, I could have gotten a word or two wrong, but that's basically exactly what he said. That we can print money, but we can't print purchasing power, right? That's exactly true. Like, he was totally upfront about that. And he was a big gold advocate in his early days too. So, he knows what's up, and I mean, he was a smart guy. I'm not saying he didn't sell out by becoming head of the Federal Reserve. I think he basically did, but even now, he's not as gung-ho on gold as he was in the early days. I think he sold his soul to the Illuminati, you know what I mean? Or at least got corrupted when he was in government service, you know what I mean? But, yeah, that's how it is. The government can print currency, but it can't print purchasing power. Purchasing power is created by productivity and innovation, because productivity is why any money has any value. And it increases in standard of living occur because of either there being more production and more production at a cheaper price, or there being more advanced technology, which can allow more production, but can also allow the production of things that were never in existence before, right? But yeah, a freemium system will almost certainly not work. A universal basic income is almost certainly not going to work. And considering high IQ is pretty rare, like I said, I don't know, 5%, 9% or 15%, I think it was 9% of the population of IQs above 115. This means there will be a lot of female patriarchs of families as well, right? But women may possess intelligence and memory, but they still lack wisdom and morality. And so such female patriarchs of their families, that is the only person in the whole family who has an IQ 115 or above, and thus the only female in a family that is able to get a job, and thus support her whole immediate and extended family. Such women in that position of being the patriarch of the family, or matriarch, but more patriarch because she's the provider, right? She's going to need male advisors, and maybe families will be joined. And maybe, she and her family will join to another family that has a male patriarch. And then maybe, he will help her rule wisely because, he's smarter than her. He has more wisdom and more morality than her, as well as, an IQ high like hers. You know what I mean? So, the women may be smart enough to work and support the family with their earnings, but her family will be ruled by the male patriarch of another family, or who will have authority over her, or who will maybe give her advice so that she can rule her family wisely. And, he'll financially support his family, and she'll support her family, but, he'll have authority over both families, or he will have authority over his family, and he'll, advise her, and so she'll essentially, de facto, be under his authority, even if she's not officially, right? She might make decisions about some things in her family, but, maybe he will have authority, that is the male patriarch of another family that her family is joined to. Maybe he'll have authority to overrule her, and perhaps she would also have male advisors in her own family to help her make decisions because, men have wisdom and morality, even if they don't have a high IQ, right? So, like, maybe a guy in her family has a 107 IQ and she has a 115 IQ. He's not as smart as her, but he has more wisdom and more morality. So then his advice can, supplement her high IQ so that together they can make wise decisions for the family. You know what I mean? And if she, the high IQ girl, has kids, the female patriarch, she will probably have fewer kids because of needing to work. And her sisters and her brothers and her other extended family members will help her raise her kids so that she has the free time to work for a living in order to support her whole immediate and extended family. And when I say extended family, I mean her cousins and cousins' kids and uncles and stuff like that. But she, the high IQ female authority over the family who earns the money, she might only have 2 or 3 kids. Because women can either be breeders and have a lot of kids, or they can have a career, a job for their whole life, right? One or the other. And if she's taking care of the whole immediate and extended family, she can't be a breeder. She has to have a job. So then at the most, she could only have 1 or 2 or 3 kids, right? And only if she's helped in raising them by her relatives, right? But having more than that would be prohibitive. And if her cousins and sisters and such are all having kids with sperm of high IQ men with good memories and great health, well, then there will be lots of high IQ kids born to other women in her family, and so it will not be as necessary that she, the highest IQ one in the family, have a lot of kids herself, because the other women will be having high IQ kids, her sisters and cousins, female cousins and stuff. And if gold is insanely expensive at that time, when, hardly anybody has a job because of the high IQ requirement for a middle-class job, like $2 million an ounce in today's purchasing power, then the male members of her family could use their strength to use a gold mining box. I can't remember what they're called, but it's a box, that you like dump water and rocks and dirt and stuff into near a river or whatever, and then it's got like different levels, and you dump out the top levels, and the gold accumulates in the bottom level, right? Like Junius Maltby has talked about it. If the male members of the family could use their strength to be constantly dumping, rocks and dirt and water into a gold mining box like that, and they could do that every day and make a little bit of money that way by collecting a tiny bit of gold. Otherwise there would be no way for those guys to be useful or make money other than farming. But that would be limited by how much land they would have. They would probably have enough labor to run the farm and have a lot of surplus guys who want to be useful, but there's no work for them, not even work dealing with the crops. Because, there's all the male patriarchs in the family are working the land, so there's like more than enough of them, and most of the women are too, right? Except for the ones who are having high IQ kids with other men's, with high IQ men's sperm. You need to realize it's coming down the pike so that you can start preparing for it today. Saving 1,000 ounces of silver might be enough to not just get you through the crash and the following aftermath, such as a new continuation of the suffering because of stupid government policies, such as what happened during the Great Depression, when the government's stupid actions trying to help fix the problem only made the problem worse and prolonged the suffering. So we had this ongoing depression that lasted for years and years, when that was completely unnecessary, and if the government had stayed out of it, we would have bounced back from the Great Depression almost instantly, or at least in a year or two. But no, it just went on and on and on, because the government's trying to help things, right? If you have just a few thousand ounces of silver and 5 or 10 ounces of gold, that might also be enough to help you support your immediate family. Like maybe even your extended family too, through a period of no one being able to work because of all jobs being taken by automation, and only 1 or 2 people in the whole extended family being able to work, and thus you needing to help your family not starve while you're waiting for your sisters and their high IQ babies to grow up to be old enough to where they can also start earning money and supporting everybody. Kids conceived with the sperm of guys with great health, great IQs, and great memories. That's 14 to 16 year period between when your sisters or female cousins conceive children and when those kids are old enough to work online by coding or investing, that 14 to 16 year period of time will be a very difficult period. How will the mothers of those kids and the kids themselves get fed? Number one, either farming, or number two, by you gradually selling off your stockpile of gold or silver that you were wise enough to save before the crash happened. Back when it was possible to amass huge amounts of precious metals for very, very little money. Or by the 1 or 2 smart people in the entire extended family having jobs and buying food in bulk, and thereby feeding everyone in their entire extended family. And maybe to survive, everyone will have to sell their house maybe, right? And everyone in the extended family will, pool their money, they'll buy a plot of land, they'll garden with it, they'll have one big, maybe they'll be just land and there's nothing on it, and they'll build their own little barracks on it, and everyone sleeps in the barracks, and then they'll build another communal building as well, where people, talk or go on the internet if they have any computers or internet access, or, they read or whatever, and then they can live cheaply and densely packed together, the whole extended family, and they can gradually use the money obtained from everyone selling their house to feed the entire extended family over that 14 to 16 year period until those high IQ kids grow up and then can help support the family as well. Selling your house for $500,000 would enable you to feed the entire extended family for quite a bit of time. If super cheap food was bought and was also bought in bulk, and everybody ate very frugally, and everyone else could have sold their houses as well, and so they could feed the entire extended family when your money runs out. And then when that money runs out, like I said before, you could use your silver or gold to feed the family. And then hopefully that will enable the family to survive long enough for those high IQ kids who are growing up to get enough to where they can start doing freelance coding online to make money, or investing the family's remaining money and thereby making money to support the family, or getting a job in the outside world at a corporation and supporting the family with his wages working that job, that you need a high IQ to be able to work. But at that time, after the crash, and after automation has taken jobs from everyone with an IQ below 115, in other words, at least 85% of the population, well, then it will be obvious to everyone that we need to do eugenic breeding. But it will, in a sense, be too late at that point. You have to do it now, before it's obvious, because that's the only way you can make it through smoothly, is if you prepare ahead of time. Make it through the crash and the coming depression due to automation, and the depression before that due to the crash. If you don't prepare for this stuff ahead of time, you are screwed. But if you do prepare for it ahead of time by buying gold and silver, by, starting a commune or joining a commune, by doing eugenic breeding, by buying weapons and stockpiling bullets, you do all that stuff, you might be able to survive, even if you don't get rich or anything. And, if you do it well enough, you might even make money and thrive. But at the very least, you need to be able to survive, right? And you got to prepare ahead of time if you even want to have a hope of just surviving. So, this has been Redshift. Hit the thumbs up button if you like this video. Hit the thumbs down button if you hated it. Peace, trucks.